Okie dokie, let's talk about soil. By the way, don't offend Batman and call it dirt. If you also, that could offend a soil scientist as well, because soil is not just dirt, soil is a very complex structure. So let's talk about how it forms as well as how it can be broken down, by which I mean formation and erosion of soil. So, first, let's talk about how soil forms. So, soil is formed when parent material or original rock, bedrock, etc., is weathered. Weathering can happen by wind or by water, just in case you've forgotten that from middle school. And then when that parent material that has been broken down is transported and deposited somewhere, that can form soil. Now, soil formation is a pretty slow process. It can take anywhere from 500 to 1,000 years just to form an inch of topsoil. So we don't consider soil a renewable resource because it is not something that can be really recreated on a human time scale. And the soil formation is affected by a number of things. Climate, so for example, precipitation. In areas with large amounts of rainfall, you're more likely to have faster soil formation because the water that's falling will weather or break down parent material faster. Temperature extremes can also increase the rate of weathering because rock can contract and expand when the temperature goes colder and higher. That can cause cracks to form, and those cracks can then be further expanded by water. For example, if water freezes in a crack, the ice will have a larger volume than the liquid water and will expand the size of the crack. Then you can have living organisms. So, for example, various plants can help to break down rock. Lichen and moss are especially good at breaking down parent material. Lichens are a symbiotic relationship between algae and a fungus. And those fungi release chemicals that will chemically digest the rock, and that will help break down the rock or parent material. So when you have lichens in an area, they can help physically or chemically break down the rock as well as physically, and plants themselves can help physically break down rock as well. Their roots can start out very small and then infiltrate small cracks. And as those roots expand, they can actually widen cracks in rock, which helps to break it down. Then, kind of mature soil will have a lot of nutrients dissolved in it that will make it a very good growing medium for plants. And those nutrients are added by both decomposers, which can add nutrients from breaking down dead materials, as well as nitrogen fixing bacteria that can cause nitrogen heavy chemicals to be released into the soil as well. And then the topography can also have an impact on soil formation because when you have, for example, very heavily sloped land, that will cause water to run down it at a faster velocity. Higher velocity water or higher velocity wind will increase the rate of weathering. And then when you have wind and water have access to a rock face, they can also transport particles and make it easier to deposit those particles elsewhere. So here's a diagram showing the formation of soil. When you have bare rock, either by the creation of new rock from igneous rock that has been formed by cooling magma, or if you have some newly exposed sedimentary or metamorphic rock, that can begin to be broken down by water and wind. And then once primary succession starts and you start to have some simple organisms move in, once they die, they're going to add organic matter to the soil and to the kind of smaller rock pieces that are there. You may have a shallow layer of uh, fine soil particles as well as smaller rocks that are still being weathered from the parent material. Then, as further weathering happens, further deposition, you start to develop a more complex structure to the soil where you'll have organic matter or an organic matter rich layer on the top with larger plants growing. You'll have particles like clay or sand or maybe even small pieces of gravel, and then you'll have small rocks below that, which are the parent material that is starting to decompose. My apologies, I am distracted by a cat running around. And then finally, you have a well developed soil with a mature soil profile, which we're going to talk about in a few moments. So, soil horizons are these layers that develop in mature rock, a mature soil. You can see actually soil horizons visibly in some mature soils. So here we see a kind of nutrient rich topsoil, and then we see a subsoil that is less nutrient rich. How can I tell? Well, the more nutrient rich a soil is, the darker or the blacker that it will tend to look. And these layers are characterized by either having more or less organic material, as well as by particle and mineral content. So most soils have three major horizons: the surface horizon, the subsoil, and the substratum. And you can see these characteristic layers when you look at soils even from different regions. These soil horizons are characterized by these kind of characteristic colors, textures, structures, mineral and chemical composition, and even how they're arranged in a soil profile. What is a soil profile? Where it's the sequence of layers or horizons that you find in soil, extending from the surface all the way down to the bedrock, aka the parent material. So, in a very well developed soil profile, you'll have these layers or these horizons. The surface layer or the O horizon is called that because it's very rich in organic material. Then below that, you're going to have the topsoil or the A horizon. It will also be relatively rich in organic material as well as having complex root systems from plants and probably a lot of organisms living in it too. uh, Earthworms, insects of various kinds, etc. Topsoil tends to contain humus, not humus. Humus is something you eat. Humus is something you grow food in, and it contains organisms as well as organic materials. Sometimes below the A horizon, you'll have the E horizon, which is the zone of leaching. It's got a lot of dissolved materials that are basically being carried by water deeper into the soil. The subsoil or B horizon tends to be rich in certain minerals like aluminum, iron. It can have larger amounts of humus, and it can have clay particles accumulate as well. Then the substratum or the sea horizon is partially weathered parent material, so it will have small or large rocks and some particles. It is still in the process of being broken down. And then finally, below that, you'll have the bedrock, which is the parent material itself. Now, soil can be formed and soil can also be eroded. Soil erosion is going to usually happen via wind or water, which are going to carry soil particles away. They'll be deposited elsewhere. A lot of times they'll end up in the nearest body of water as well. The rate of this can be affected heavily by human activities, especially anything that removes vegetation. One thing you should hopefully have learned in your physical science classes is that vegetation helps hold soil in place. So if you want to make sure that your soil is not weathered, it's not eroded, and is not removed, you'll have plant cover. So you'll have plants growing on it. Protecting soils is important for more than just making sure that we have dirt and soil in which to grow our crops. It's also important because soil has a very important role in performing an ecosystem and that ecosystem service, and that is improving water quality because soil can help filter and cleanse water as it passes through. So, what happens when you have erosion happen? Well, it destroys the soil profile. It decreases the ability of soil to hold water, which we're going to talk about in our next lesson, is very important for making sure that soil is still able to support plant life. It can also decrease percolation, which is water moving through the soil or moving deeper into the soil. Something that is important for water retention. When you have increased soil erosion, that increases soil compaction, which can also decrease water retention because the soil gets compacted or squished together. It doesn't have pore spaces or empty spaces where water can sit. This can also increase runoff, and when you increase runoff, that increases erosion, which increases runoff, which further increases erosion, and it forms a positive feedback loop, which just basically makes the whole process worse. In areas where there's low precipitation, since you're not retaining water and water is able to run off more easily, that can increase drought. And it also decreases the filtration of water and the cleaning of it, which, like I said on the previous slide, is important for water quality. What are some of the major consequences of erosion? Well, one of them was the Dust Bowl, otherwise known as the Dirty 30s. In the 1930s, in the Great Plains regions, due to poor soil management as well as a long-term drought, there was massive erosion. Another thing that happened is that before humans moved in and started intensive farming in the area, the grasses that lived in the area had these very deep root systems that held topsoil in place. But when you plowed those prairies and started growing crops there, that disrupted the roots that were holding that topsoil in place. And so a combination of that, as well as drought, allowed bare soil that was not covered by vegetation, not held in place by root systems, to be blown away by heavy winds. Most of the topsoil blew away, and it ended up blowing away as far away as the Atlantic Ocean. And once that soil sunk to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, it wasn't salvageable. You could try, if you really wanted, to take a ship out there and dig up some of the soil that blew away during the Dust Bowl, but at this point, it's got so much salt in it, it wouldn't be fertile soil anymore. This affected about 100 million acres, or about 400,000 square kilometers. So it affected a massive area of the United States. It decreased food production. People were no longer able to support themselves, and this caused large waves of migration away from the center of the United States. This is, for example, a dust storm happening in Rolla, Kansas, and you can see just massive storms of dust that would just roll through an area, carrying away the topsoil, also having some negative consequences because it's not like you could see or breathe through that. And so, soil erosion is a bad thing. We should try to prevent it. All right? Hopefully, you are not having soil erosion in your area, and after it rains, you can roll around like a happy pig in some mud, just like this Bitmoji.